Let's talk about YouTube podcasts. What is it and why you should or shouldn't consider uploading your podcast to YouTube? Let's start by talking about what is it. Podcasters have been migrating to YouTube for years because of the advantages of adding the visuals to their podcast. But now YouTube has the podcast tab that I've already mentioned in this video. So what is the podcast tab? Well, it's a way for you to designate a particular playlist on your YouTube channel or multiple playlists on your YouTube channel as podcasts. And what that means is, number one, if someone is searching for a podcast on YouTube, they can find maybe your podcast a little bit easier because it's not competing with all the other videos that are out there on YouTube. And I thought that was really the only real advantage to labeling a playlist as a podcast, but that playlist now shows up on the YouTube Music app as a podcast. So that's kind of the big advantage of YouTube adding podcasts to their platform. It gives you another way to be found, not just on the YouTube platform, but through YouTube Music as well. So let's talk about how you get there, right? So there's a couple ways you can do that. As I mentioned, if you have a playlist already that you consider a podcast on YouTube, maybe it's all of your videos, maybe it's just some of your videos you consider a podcast. So for me, I do videos with visuals here on this channel, and it's all Summit City Studios, but I do have a podcast called Good Podcasting that I publish and distribute as an audio podcast as well as a video podcast here on this channel. So I've taken all of those videos, I've labeled them as a podcast, a Good Podcasting podcast, and now that shows up on the YouTube Music app just because I labeled it, I designated that playlist as a podcast. Or you can add your podcast just by your RSS feed. So if you go back to your podcast host, grab that RSS feed, upload that to YouTube. Now, anytime you post a podcast to your host, that RSS feed will update and it will shoot it over to YouTube, and your listeners, your audience can find it both on YouTube and on YouTube Music. Now, I want to talk about some of the advantages to having a podcast on YouTube versus just an audio podcast. So let's get into that a little bit. Number one, increase reach. Your audience reach has the potential to be greater on YouTube because it is the second largest search engine in the world next to Google. So you have more of an opportunity for people to find your podcast on YouTube perhaps than any other podcast platform that doesn't have a very robust search feature. I do think you have a greater possibility of engagement or for engagement on YouTube as well. There's a lot of community that seems to be built around videos and content creation and around podcasting on YouTube. So in the comments, you can interact with your listeners, with your audience, with your viewers there. Whereas, if you're posting on just a traditional podcast app, there's a barrier there. It might be find me on social media. It might be find me on Instagram, message me there, hit me up, here's my email address, or find me on YouTube and we can interact there. You see, there's a barrier to many of those podcast apps where YouTube, you can do it right then, right there in real time in the comments, and you can have a conversation. Now, a couple of the others quickly, the monetization possibilities are greater on YouTube. I just think they've got more built in. Now they've lowered the threshold and given some additional opportunities and additional ways that you can be monetized on YouTube. And I'm actually getting close to that. So if you're interested and you want to subscribe and you watch more videos and help me get there, man, I'd really appreciate that. But don't do it for me. I'm telling you so you can do this for you. Now, beyond monetization, your podcast is actually more accessible on YouTube to those that maybe wouldn't listen on a traditional podcast app. I think I saw recently, and I talked about this in another video, that 80% of YouTube videos are watched with the sound off. So accessibility is a factor when uploading your podcast to YouTube. Now, one more quick one that you might not think about initially, but becomes really important on the back end if you want to continue to grow your podcast and make sure you're reaching the audience you want to reach, and you want to know when's the best time to post your podcast and all that, is the analytics features on YouTube. I've been doing this for years now, and I've not found any better analytics than what YouTube provides as far as content creation goes. I've used a number of different host sites for my audio podcasts, and while they're coming along and the analytics are getting better, they're nowhere close to what YouTube provides in the way of analytics. So if that's something that you're interested in and knowing who your audience is, what time of day they're getting on, how fast you're growing, how much of your podcast people are listening to, where they're listening from, and more, YouTube would be a great place to upload your podcast. Now, you're only going to get their analytics. You're not going to get the analytics from any other podcast platform that you have your podcast on. You're only going to get YouTube analytics, but they're great analytics. So I would encourage you to check that out. Now, a couple reasons that you might not want to put your podcast on YouTube. Number one is the additional workload that's involved in putting a video up on YouTube. And let's be honest, audio podcasting is way easier and takes way less time for the most part. The simple dialogue-based podcasts take way less time to record, way less time to edit than even a video podcast. Now, some people don't want to edit. They want to set up a camera, set up a microphone, record, say their piece, do their interview, whatever it is, and publish directly to YouTube. And I say go for it. If that's something that you want to do and you are capable of doing, go for it. More power to you. But I know that I like to put a little bit of effort on the back end into editing my sound, number one, but also my video. So it looks good. It's something fun to look at. It's colorful. It has good transitions. I can put some titles up there. So I spend a lot of time editing. And if you are one like me that wants to have titles and you like to have the extras in your video, it's going to take more time, because in audio podcasting, you don't have to worry about any of that. So consider the extra time involved. I'm not trying to discourage you. I think it's a great thing to do if you have the time and the ability to do so. Now, along with that is your audience expectations. When you have a video podcast and you're producing video content on the regular on YouTube, your audience has an expectation that if they're going to watch it, first of all, I've mentioned already, the audio has to be good, but the video has to be good as well. If they're going to spend time sitting down and watching it and not just listening and not just looking at the captions and the subtitles, but actually watching your video, they have a higher expectation. So consider that going in. Again, not to discourage you, but just a factor to consider, however minor it may be for you and your channel. And the last one I'll mention is probably the most important, and that's what your expectations are for your podcast, for your content. What are you hoping to accomplish? Maybe the visual element and the time and the effort it's going to take actually detract from the conversations that you want to have on your podcast, whether it's you speaking into a microphone by yourself, interviewing someone through Riverside that we've talked about multiple times on this channel in recent videos. If you're interested, check that out. There's a link in the description where you can get a discount. But enough about Riverside. Or maybe you're just sitting across the table from a co-host or someone, a guest that you're interviewing. Maybe the video will detract from the experience. Maybe you're comfortable on camera, but your guest is not. They feel more comfortable sitting down, and you can have a better conversation without a camera in someone's face because they feel more comfortable just having a conversation and talking with you. Now, there's other reasons. Maybe your podcast is more of an audio experience. Many podcasts are going that route, and they're essentially becoming audio books that are released episode by episode or chapter by chapter. And maybe the video isn't necessary because it's the audio experience that brings the listener into the story and into the content that's most important. So consider the type of content that you're putting out there, the type of content that you're creating, and whether or not video is even right for that. So there you go. Podcasting on YouTube, what it is, why you should do it, and perhaps maybe why it's not the right thing for you. There's more to come. More features will be released, and we'll cover those as they come. But for now, if you've got questions about podcasting on YouTube or podcasting in general, leave me a note in the comments. Let me know what you think about this. Maybe there's something I missed. Let me know that in the comments. I'll get back with you as soon as I can, and I'll see you in the next video.